Yeah, my take on the Bronny thing is the way the world works is everybody, I mean, this is the way college works. How many times has somebody asked me, can you get my daughter or son an internship at Fox? Like, that's the world. If Bronny gets drafted 55th, I'm okay with it. What do you make of it?
I mean, maybe you're okay with it, Colin, but I'm highly critical of those types of family connections, and I discussed that about 90 minutes ago on What's Right with Nick Wright, a podcast and YouTube show I host with my son that you can catch everywhere. I mean, give me a break. I mean, this is anyone check the Patriots' power structure? Because I'm pretty sure Robert Kraft's son, Jonathan Kraft, is in the process of hiring Elliot Wolf to be their full-time GM, son of Ron Wolf, and Elliot Wolf's right-hand man is the son of a longtime Patriot employee. Listen, we have been fine for years with nepotism in front offices, coaching, and ownership in sports. We see it all over the place in sports and in real-world businesses. And if yes, we have, and here is where I would push back even further against the criticism, which is we have seen players not nearly LeBron James cachet be able to help out their siblings. The Knicks signed J.R. Smith's brother Chris to a contract as part of the recruitment of J.R. The entire Antetokounmpo bloodline has been getting NBA paychecks seemingly because of Giannis. And so I would totally understand if a team says, all right, what are the probabilities of a second-round pick panning out, a late second-round pick historically? Less than 10%. So, yeah, take a flyer on Bronny James, if for no other reason than the name and what it will do for our relationship with LeBron. What is, to me, the more interesting question is this one, Colin, and I do not think this is going to happen because I do think LeBron is going to stay with the Lakers. But if LeBron were actually open to leaving the Lakers this offseason, what pick would you trade straight up to have LeBron James on a reasonable contract? Would he be worth the 20th pick of the draft, a year 22, 40-year-old LeBron James? Would he be worth the 24th pick of the draft? If he is open to leaving, would a contending team like, say, the Knicks or the Sixers spend a first-round pick on Bronny because they're actually spending the pick on securing LeBron? I don't think that's going to happen, but that's an interesting thought exercise. But, of course, the Lakers spending the 55th pick on Bronny James shouldn't bother anybody unless they have an axe to grind with LeBron. So
I was saying this. I've been arguing with J-Mac. It's the weakest draft, they're saying, since the Anthony Bennett draft, maybe worse. There's no domestic stars in the top 3 or 4. And I said with Zach Edey, the entire NBA uses the same data and analytics. And then Minnesota said, yeah, we're going to go with 2 centers. And they're the number 1 seed in the West. By the way, I saw this with David Robinson Duncan, the Twin Towers in Houston. They're like, you know what, we're going to switch it up and do something different. We see this in the NFL where maybe because they had to, Tennessee said, we're going to be a run team. And they ended up the number 1 seed in the AFC. So I am for contrarian thinkers. My take on Zach Edey is he got an NBA big in foul trouble all night, a big that had dominated players. He scored 37. He had no real help. One other guy scored 12. He had no real help. And he is a different player than a year ago when he was very good a year ago, but he seems stronger, 7'4", 300, and he's kind of ripped. He doesn't move great, but he moves well enough to be an NBA draft pick in a bad draft, doesn't he?
So I have evolved on Edey as well, because if a guy putting up a 40-10 in the Elite Eight doesn't make you move, then why play the games? If a guy going 37-10 in the championship game against the most dominant other 7-footer in college basketball doesn't at least make you adjust your eyes, then what will? I'm going to add another element here, Colin, and it's not that I think this guy can be a star. But if you'd asked me 3 months ago about Zach Edey, I'd have said he's Boban Marjanovic. I don't think that anymore. I think he is more than that because of what we saw him do. And the other element is this. He played every single minute last night.
Yep.
How much better will he look athletically if he's playing 18 or 20 minutes of a 48-minute game rather than 39 and a half minutes of a 40-minute game? Our mutual friend and regular Herd guest, Kevin O'Connor, threw out an interesting draft team for him, which was, I heard you and J-Mac talking about how he would do against Bam. What about him alongside Bam? What about the Miami Heat saying, we have Bam who can spread the floor offensively, Zach can stay closer to the basket on that side of the ball, and then Bam can rove defensively and handle some of those coverages that we think Zach couldn't deal with. I do think he's an NBA player, and I know that Klingon is considered the far better NBA prospect. I don't think that Klingon will be a better NBA player than Zach Edey. I don't think either will be stars, and I'm not even sure either is a long-term starter. But I do think Zach Edey's an NBA player, and I didn't think that at the beginning of this season.
I was saying, if they were movies, Kentucky basketball is Barbie and UConn is Oppenheimer. A historic 3-hour movie on the atomic bomb, and it swept through the awards. You'd say to yourself, who's going to sit through 3 hours? It's a history lesson. But that's what they are. It's a serious program for serious people. And I watched them last night, and I got to tell you, I don't know where they rank it. They remind me a bit of the Villanova team, maybe deeper, that had Jalen Brunson, Eric Pascal, Mikal Bridges. You're not, this is just too many good players. But I look at this program, and I'm like, did they surpass Duke last night over the last 25 years as America's best college basketball program?
Well, over the last 25 years, they are, without a question, America's best college basketball program. They have 6 titles. I think they have more titles in the last 25 years than Duke has in its history. The question is, are they now officially a, quote, blue blood, unquote? And if so, do we have to kick somebody out? Or is there, a limitless supply? And no, I mean that, because UCLA, Kentucky, North Carolina, Indiana, Duke, there's 5. UConn's better than all of them over the last quarter century, and historically, really only Kentucky and UCLA have them far trumped, and you could argue North Carolina has them ticked. But to win 6 titles with 3 different coaches, to now have a back-to-back championship run, Colin, where no one covered, no one came within a dozen points, both of these things can be true. Against their current competition, it's one of the most dominant teams ever, and they are not one of the 20 best college basketball teams, this year's UConn team of all time, just because of the way the sport has changed. I smiled a bit when they mentioned at the broadcast that this is the first national championship game to have 2 starting 7-footers in 40 years. And the one 40 years ago was Ewing Olajuwon. And I was like, okay, yeah, the sport's a little different. 40 years ago, we got Ewing Olajuwon going for the national title. And this year we have Edey Klingon. So the sport's changed, and UConn has, dominated. And credit to Hurley, who, listen, Hurley's in the same, bucket of coaches as I kind of mentally put in Nick Sirianni, where it irritates me. Like, why are you yelling at Edey? Why are you shoving your own player on the court? But unlike Sirianni, he has gotten it done in the biggest moments, the biggest spots, and he's unquestionably, right now, has earned the title as the best coach in the sport. I wish he would, chill a little bit, ramp it down a touch, but I guess it's not his style.
So we were talking about this with Giannis. So be very, very careful. I got into this discussion with somebody about a month ago. I said, be very, very careful about wanting power. What you want is culpability to blame others. Because if you have all the power and things go sideways, you take all the heat. And I said, power's overrated. I used to think it was everything. Now I don't know. And I look at Giannis, and he has power. And so they moved off Budenholzer, who won a title, and then they moved off Adrian Griffin, and then they moved off to Drew Holiday to make him happy with Dame, and now Doc Rivers isn't working, and I'm like, okay, but you're not close to Boston. You don't match up. You don't have their depth. You're just simply not as good. And in the West, You're a 500 team. Go look at them at 29 games against the West this year. They're like 15-14. They're a team. And so in the West, I don't think they're as good as the Lakers. And I don't think they're as talented I don't think they're as good as Golden State. And I know they're not as good as the Lakers. They're not Denver, forget it, OKC. So my takeaway is, if they get bounced early, and now that Embiid is back, and if they played Milwaukee, I would take the Sixers and Embiid over Milwaukee. And what happens if Giannis and the Bucks get bounced early? Nick, I do not believe Giannis is going to go, yeah, I'm good with it. Let's run it back. Where are they as a franchise?
All right, so a lot there. Now, we know from Giannis last year, there are no losses, there are just lessons, but that would be one hell of a lesson going out in round one in back-to-back years. Once is the 1 seed and once is the 2 seed in your scenario. This is the one silver lining, because, spoiler alert, this was my pick to win the championship, and I don't want to change those picks, but I don't have a lot of evidence to back that up over the last 2 months of the season. But if you're looking for silver linings to this swoon, is dropping to the 3 line is actually advantageous for them. Even though they've struggled with Indiana, you would much rather deal with either Cleveland that's falling apart or Indiana in round 1 than Philly, which I know they have a very tattered playoff history, Philly with Embiid. You do not want Philly in round 1 with how they have looked lately, and that's who they would get as the 2 seed. But to your bigger picture question, Giannis was on the precipice of us talking about him in all-time Pantheon terms. And I'm not saying he's no longer, that's no longer eligible for him, but you win back-to-back MVPs, a Defensive Player of the Year. You follow that up with a Finals MVP where you score 50 to win the title, coming back from 2-0 down, and it's like, oh my God, where are we headed from here? You then are up 3-2 on Boston, and, Tatum gets you in that game 6, and you lose it. You get blown out in game 7. You then lose as a 1 versus 8 the next year. You add Dame. If you go out again before the conference finals, I think Giannis, despite signing the extension, will start to be looking around. And of course, a lot of that would have to fall on his broad shoulders. Like, individual players, you know how I feel about this. It is unfair to be like, well, why didn't you win the title? In the NBA, that's not how it works. It is not unfair to say, why didn't you get out of round 1 in consecutive seasons?
Right.
That is a fair question. And if people remember, Kobe Bryant, after Shaq left, they missed the playoffs. They then blow a 3-1 lead in round 1. They then lose in round 1. And what happened after that? Kobe's in a parking lot, caught on candid camera, talking bad about Andrew Bynum, goes on Stephen A's radio show and asks for a trade. They salvage it by bringing in Powell, and then obviously they go on a run. But all-time great players that feel like I should be winning more than I am, they very often then start looking around, even if we feel like they are locked into that team for life. So this is a very precarious and important next few weeks for Milwaukee and Giannis.
I said yesterday, there's not many Caitlin Clarks. A lot of athletes ride the wave, even stars. She was the wave. Like Michael Jordan is, to me, he left the NBA, lost half its ratings. That's the biggest icon in any sport. I think Tiger Woods changed viewing habits. His golf ball made hundreds of millions of dollars for Nike. Not the clubs, the golf ball. Everything changed TV ratings. Then you get into, obviously a Tony Hawk. You get into these guys that drove video games.
That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Shaun White, Usain Bolt, there's a lot. Michael Phelps. Caitlin Clark, you can argue, is after Michael and Tiger, you could put in the 3 spot. I didn't yesterday, but I think there's an argument to be made. What do you make of her legacy?
Sure. Listen, she is in the room for the conversation of the greatest women's college basketball player ever. Now, I can't, whenever people, prior to 4 years ago, if someone said, who's the greatest women's player ever, I would have always said Cheryl Miller.
Yeah.
But to be fair, that's just because that's what I was told. I consider myself a basketball historian, but you can't really be an expert on women's college basketball of the 80s unless you watched it. Like, the archives aren't on YouTube. Even all of the box scores aren't available. So that's a tough one. Prior to Caitlin Clark, the best player I had seen as a kid was Shamiqua Holdsclaw, and as an adult was Diana Taurasi. I understand Breanna Stewart has four seasons, 4 titles, 3 Player of the Year awards. That seems unimpeachable. You dig into it a little bit further. Breanna Stewart, the year after she left UConn, they were 36-0 headed into the Final Four and lost by 2 in overtime. The year after that, they were 36-0 headed to the Final Four and lost in overtime. So as great as she was, she had one of the greatest all-time collections of talent around her when UConn was really, really rolling. I don't think I've ever seen a female player better than Caitlin Clark. I know there's never been a more impactful one. And I do think that if you want to say she didn't win a title, she's ineligible for the GOAT conversation, that's fine. But I think you also have to ask yourself, hey, was there a single player on Iowa other than Caitlin Clark that would have gotten minutes for South Carolina?
Right.
The only thing standing between South Carolina and 3 straight national championships and an 82-game winning streak right now is that Caitlin beat them a year ago. And so I don't know if she is the GOAT. She's in the room of GOATs. What she is unquestionably is a transcendent player at the best time possible for the sport. That I don't know that the WNBA, Colin, in fact, I do know, it's not going to do the ratings the women's tournament did.
Yeah.
But I also know that I must not have been the only one that today looked on SeatGeek or StubHub or whomever, like, hey, when are the Indiana Fever coming to my city? And I found out by just looking at, for the New York Liberty, what ticket was 5 times more expensive than all the other ones. And it was the Indiana Fever game.
Right.
And you can check that out city by city. So I do think she's going to have a real impact on the WNBA, even if you don't see it for, 19 million people watching the championship like we saw in college basketball.
It's a sport that's growing, and then they got their icon. And, you could say this, too. When David Stern took over the NBA, there were levels of popularity. Some say he saved it. Yep. It was Magic and Bird, and all of a sudden, oh, here comes Michael. And so I think women's basketball has it's much better than 25 years ago. When Cheryl Miller left, the sport could not sustain ratings. I do think it'll sustain a big chunk of its ratings. I think there's a new world, and the new world is the quality of the product is pretty darn good. In a time of the year, there's not a lot of urgency.
There's not, and I'm going to say one other thing, and listen, my son who lives, second mention of my son on the Today Show, who lives in LA, he got to go watch her in person. I'm jealous of you guys. The young lady at USC, Juju, who lost in the Elite Eight to Paige and UConn, she has real star quality as well. And while she's not the range shooter that Caitlin is, she is she is a more dazzling ball handler.
Yes.
The comp I would have for her is almost a female Kyrie Irving stylistically. And I think she can ride that wave that you're talking about, where we actually care and are watching women's basketball in numbers we haven't before. And she will draw eyeballs. Yeah. She will, to me, is a more exciting draw than anything on the men's side of things next year. Yep. And we could see her for the next few years at USC, which is great. Yeah,
Duke's going to have a really good player. Names escape me. Is it Connor Cooper Flagg? Is that it? Cooper Flagg. Yeah. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the freshman. Yeah, he's going to be great.
Yeah. So both men's and women's are going to have, an ascending star, and that's good for the sport. Nick Wright, buddy, is good as always to see you, and we'll talk soon. Hi, everybody. It's me, Uncle Colin. Subscribe here to get the latest from the herd, including exclusive behind-the-scenes videos and more, wherever you may be, however you may be watching. Thanks again for making us part of your day.